So I had to learn this lesson early about one's place in society. You see, I was always the tall kid in school. And even though there's supposed to be that point they tell you where in late elementary the girls get taller than the boys for a moment, none of the girls ever surpassed me. Some came close, but I was always the tallest. Now, you may think being tall has its perks, and it does have a lot of perks, but not all of them for sure. And here's one example of where it never worked out for me. Every time we were taking those group pictures, I had to be in the back, behind everyone else. And if I tried to come and be up front, I was told I needed to move. I was not in the right place. I'm sorry, Tyler. We've invited people shorter than you to be in this picture today. Please move to the back. Now, you may think that's a small thing, but I will say it bothered me from time to time. Everyone up front, you got to see their whole selves. The clothes they wore mattered. The way they stood in the picture was captured forever. They were 100% visible. I was a floating head. I might as well have been in my underwear for all that anyone could see of me. I was thinking about if we had a couple more kids this morning, I was going to invite them up, have them stand here, and then invite some adults to stand in front of them and then try to take a picture and talk about, how it is where we find who gets to be in what place. Because I never got to be the star of any picture. I was always the supporting role. Nowadays, when we're taking a group picture, I just go to the back right away. No sense trying to show off or look amazing. I just make sure I'm behind someone else, and someone else can be front and center. Because tallest does not always win. Like Jesus' story, if I go to the front of the photo, I will be moved. Who would Jesus invite to be front and center in the picture? When I was on internship in Dallas, we took the middle school youth on a mission trip over to Denver. And while in Denver, we did some things that were within walking distance of the place we were staying. And one afternoon, while walking to a service activity that we were going to, I noticed a man began walking behind us about a half block back. And as we continued to walk, he stayed right behind us. We turned left, he turned left. We turned right, he turned right. It made me nervous. Finally, after about 3 or 4 turns, we arrived at our destination. It was a soup kitchen for the elderly, which, first of all, is really neat, right? They specifically made meals for low-income elderly residents who could not afford to be in assisted living, who could not afford a car, who couldn't travel to the grocery store, and even if they could, probably couldn't make meals on their own for themselves anyway. Plus, often people who are in that situation tend to be isolated in their residences. This place made meals so that low-income elderly people who still lived in their own homes had a place to get a good meal and gather with community. Very awesome. Well, we turned into this place, and I thought, well, finally, he's going to keep going. I have nothing to worry about. Except he turned into this soup kitchen as well, because he wasn't following us. He was going there to get a good meal. And I need to admit another thing about this man, just because it's part of the story. He was a black man. And though I've been living on the south side of Chicago when I was in seminary, I grew up in rural Iowa, and there's still this innate nervousness in me around people who look different than the community I was raised in, and I was raised in a 99.98% white community. I ended up talking to this man while we were there, and he was raised in Chicago himself. We had this nice connection, but I'll admit the conversation was a little tense because my discomfort from that earlier moment where I misjudged him came across. I started our interaction with someone innocently walking behind us in a state of fear and suspicion. This was not a man I would have chosen to eat with from those first interactions. One of the things I need to learn from Jesus is that this is one of the people he would invite to the table. At political rallies, some things that's becoming popular again now we're coming to midterms, hundreds or thousands of supporters gather to hear from their preferred candidate. However, sometimes a few people from the opposite political spectrum show up, right? Those who oppose this candidate. And they say things in opposition. Maybe it's politely in the form of a question, or maybe it's a rude interruption. But they make a different voice heard in the room. And more often than should be true, the crowds boo these voices out of the room, and politicians respond with similar disapproval. But in our country, we're trying to build a democracy where everyone has equal voice, right? Where it's ruled by common opinion, but it's ruled in such a way that the uncommon opinion isn't oppressed. We need diverse voices in conversation together. So I think if Jesus were in the political arena in America, and especially any time where he would find himself in a clearly partisan space, I betcha he'd intentionally invite people from the other end of the political spectrum to come and be present in that space with him, don't you think? Jesus was walking down the road approaching a town. Everyone was excited. Here's the man who healed my cousin Sam of leprosy. I hear he healed someone who'd been injured for 18 years, and he did it on the Sabbath. People were crowding around him, everyone hoping to have him stay at their house. Imagine the honor of being the person who gets to host Jesus at your house. It'd be a lot of work, let's admit this, but everyone is going to have to come to your house. You be able to play that card for decades. Yeah, but only Jesus stayed at my house. Come on. Jesus thinks I'm the important one in town. Yeah, but I get to make all the decisions now because Jesus trusts me. But as Jesus is walking down the road, he looks up into a tree and says to the shortest person in town, Zacchaeus, I'm going to stay at your house today. And he's not just the shortest person in town, he's also the worst person in town. He's a tax collector. He works for Rome, our enemies. But that's the person Jesus chooses to stay with. One year in confirmation, back when I was in Pennsylvania, I asked the kids who they were and weren't allowed to socialize with. And at first, they didn't quite get the question. It's not one they've been asked before. They said, well, we're friends with everyone. And I said, I don't believe that. Just think about your lunchroom. I know from my middle school experience, there was the jock table. I was not allowed to sit there. And there was the weird kid table, and I didn't want to sit there. In 5th and 6th grade, I sat at an all-boys table, but by 7th and 8th grade, I was at the band and choir kids table. And when I started talking about this, one of the boys was like, oh, I understand what you're talking about. He piped up and he said, well, at my lunchroom, I sit at the boys' table, and I would never sit at the girls' table. We've been learning about who Jesus invites and what tables Jesus sits at and the boundaries that Jesus regularly seems to break and the places that we choose not to go. Like when he talked to the Samaritan woman, a foreigner, first century Jews like Jesus weren't supposed to get along with. And all of his disciples were shocked. But they weren't so much shocked by the fact that he was talking to an enemy. They were shocked by the fact that Jesus was talking to a woman. And so I asked the boy, what would happen if you sat at the girls' table? What do you think would happen if he sat at the girls' table? Everyone would make fun of me. The girls would get angry and yell at me, and the boys would tease me. No one would like me. I'd be ostracized. He didn't use that word, but excluded by everyone. Once a month, after that, I asked him if he had tried sitting at the girls' table yet. And every month, he told me no. He never tried it in the 2 years I had him in confirmation. But I wonder, what would have actually happened if he had done it? Do you think Jesus would go sit at the girls' table? I bet we can all think of places where we feel uninvited, where we feel like we're always last or least or lost. Which means you can also answer this question. When you're in a place where you're doing the welcoming, the including, the celebration, who might feel lost, last, or least at those moments? Like this parent I saw in the news in Iowa, whose child has unique needs that require a caretaker on the bus. But every day so far this school year, because I was already started school, the bus hasn't had a caretaker, and so the bus has driven just straight past the stop without even getting a call from the school to say, we can't pick up your child today. And this is a working parent who needs to get to work and whose child needs to go to school, but the public bus doesn't even stop and doesn't have the staffing needed, even if it did. This person's saying, everyone else is included, and I'm being left out. Or I've always imagined a presidential debate where the audience is all people who are living below the poverty line or experiencing homelessness, and where all the questions are submitted by people in such situations. What might happen in our politics if our leaders had to answer questions every election from those whose ability to speak is so small because their wealth is basically non-existent? How would that change American politics? When you have your next event, or your next group activity, or listen to your next piece of information, whether it's news or a podcast or a book or whatever, might you ask yourself this simple question: who's not being included today? And how might I include them? Because as I think about the question, who does Jesus invite? The answer, honestly, is everyone in the neighborhood, right? Jesus invites the Pharisees and the sinners. Jesus invites the tax collectors and the subsistent workers like fishermen and shepherds. Jesus invites the woman caught in adultery and the widow who was happily married for 58 years. Jesus invites the man born on the throne and the man born in the barn. Jesus invites the Asian, Hispanic, African, and European. Jesus invites the cisgender and transgender. Jesus invites the queer and the straight. Jesus invites the upstanding citizen and the one with the criminal record. Jesus invites the adamantly progressive and the strongly conservative. Jesus invites disbelievers, the doubters, and the believers. One of the blessings and the challenges of being church is that everyone is welcome here. Everyone is invited here. We are a community of the different. And one of the great beauties of the kingdom of God is that God's grace is for everyone. Jesus' love is for the whole world, and all are welcome at the table of mercy, including you. Amen.